Part 1. The Pattern. The past is never dead. It's not even past. It always starts the same way: peace, plenty, and progress. But underneath that calm surface, something builds: population, demand, speculation, until, like a tide, the great wave begins to rise. Fischer identified 4 great price revolutions, sweeping inflationary ages that reshaped civilization. The medieval wave of 1180 to 1350. In the High Middle Ages, Europe thrived. New farmland was cleared, towns expanded, trade routes buzzed. The population doubled, but prosperity carried a hidden cost. Food prices soared, while average wages stagnated. Landlords grew richer, peasants poorer. By the early 1300s, the strain broke the system. Famine, plague, and war followed. The Great Famine of 1315, then the Black Death of 1347 to 1351, wiped out a third of Europe. The economy and social order collapsed into the late medieval depression. Fischer writes that each wave ends, not in a gentle way, but in violent and catastrophic collapse. Number 2. The Tudor Wave, 1470 to 1650. Out of the ashes, new empires rose. Silver from the New World flooded Europe, fueling expansion. England's prices quadrupled under the Tudors. The poor rioted over bread. The Protestant Reformation tore through the old faith, as monarchs seized church lands to fund debts. By the 1600s, revolts and wars swept the continent. The English Civil War, the 30 Years' War, Frondes in France, another great wave had broken. Number 3. The Enlightenment Wave, 1729 to 1820. The 18th century began in optimism. Science, commerce, and colonies promised endless progress. But again, rising population strained resources. The price of food doubled across Europe by 1789, and people starved while elites threw balls. Then came the French Revolution, Napoleonic Wars, and global upheaval. When the smoke cleared, monarchies were shattered, and a new industrial age had begun. Fischer notes, price revolutions end in societal revolutions, where economic injustice ignites moral reckoning. Number 4. The Modern Wave, 1896 to present day. Fischer traced the start of the current wave to the late 19th century. Industrialization, empire, and population growth again drove prices up. The 20th century brought 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the inflation of the post-70s era. Each crisis left the world more centralized, more complex, and more fragile. And now, with debt, digital speculation, and global unrest, we may be living through the crest of the same wave. Part 2. The Breaking Point. History is a race between education and catastrophe. Here is where the calm seas turn violent. In every great wave, prices rise, slowly at first, like a tide creeping up the shore. Then something shifts. The tide no longer retreats. Food, rent, and taxes outpace wages. The rich fortify their estates. The poor loses faith. And then it breaks. And this shows that inflation isn't just economic, it's moral. When the necessities of life become luxuries, trust evaporates. Everybody stops believing in a fair world, and the bonds holding them together begin to rot. 14th century, bread and blood. During the last years of the medieval wave, the cost of grain tripled, Crops failures led to Great Famine. In the 2 years of the famine, 1315 through 1317, parents abandoned children, governments debased their coins, then the Black Death arrived, which resulted in half of Europe dying. Inflation didn't just ruin the market, it crushed faith. Monks wrote that God had abandoned mankind. Fischer calls it a moral breakdown as much as a demographic one. The 17th century. Faith and fire. When the second wave's collapse, the world was on fire. England's peasants couldn't afford bread. Spain defaulted on its debts. The Dutch fought for survival. Civil wars and witch hunts spread through exhausted populations. The 30 Years' War killed a third of Germany. Whole towns vanished. Governments turned to propaganda and fear to hold power. Money lost meaning. Promises lost weight. Fischer wrote, "Price revolutions corrode the faith of a people in their rulers and in themselves." The late 18th century. Revolution on the streets. By 1789, Paris bakeries were empty. Wages had been frozen for decades, while the price of wheat soared. When bread becomes unaffordable, Fischer warned, faith breaks too. Out of that hunger came the French Revolution. Heads rolled, kingdoms fell, and a new era rose from the guillotine's shadow. Economic collapse became moral cleansing. The 20th century. Paper money and promises. Fischer's modern wave crested with the chaos of the Great Depression, with the hyperinflation of Germany, Hungary, and later Latin America. He wrote, "Every inflation is a redistribution of virtue as well as wealth. Money dies, honesty dies with it. People cheat, hoard, or surrender to the state." By the 1970s, even the US dollar was untied from gold, a symbol, Fischer said, of faith replaced by fiat. The moral undercurrent. Collapses weren't just about prices. They were also about trust. In every wave, when rulers debased their coins, they also debased truth. This allows corruption to spread like mold through wet bread. Fischer said that after the moral rot sets in, people begin to live for the day, not for the covenant. That's when art turns cynical, politics becomes theater, and faith becomes fashion. He warned that our own age might follow the same path, when lies are cheap and truth costs too much to afford. Part 3. The Modern Wave. The fourth great wave began around 1896. It started quietly like all the others, with progress and optimism. The world industrialized, cities swelled. The promise of endless growth filled the air. But underneath that optimism, the same forces gathered. Rising costs, growing inequality, and the slow erosion of faith and institution. The first sign came before the First World War. Food prices across Europe had doubled in a generation. Farmers abandoned the land to chase wages in the cities. Nations began printing money to fund armies and empires. When war broke out in 1914, the fragile system snapped. Inflation raged through Europe, reaching its peak in the 1920s. In Germany, money became so worthless that families would burn banknotes to heat their homes. Fischer saw this period as the time of moral unraveling of modernity. He wrote that the monetary disorder is both symptoms and the cause of moral disorder. Like I said before, when the value of money dies, the value of trust dies with it. The collapse of the interwar economy set the stage for fascism, communism, and the most destructive conflict the world has ever seen. After 1945 came a brief calm. The West rebuilt, the dollar became the world's anchor, and for a generation it seemed the wave had receded. But the tide only rested. By the 1970s, the oil shocks and the end of the gold standard set inflation roaring. The cost of living rose faster than wages, the middle class strained, the governments responded by borrowing into the future. Fischer described it as a period of borrowed stability purchased with debt. Now, we are living in the crest of that modern wave. Globalization has tied every market together, so when one cracks, the world trembles. The cost of housing, food, and the basic needs ride faster than any ability to keep up. The same patterns return. Wealth consolidates, public faith collapses, and cultural confusion spreads. Fischer warned that the modern age's danger is not poverty, but disbelief. He wrote that each price revolution ends not only with economic correction, but with a crisis of the spirit. It is the moment when people stop believing in tomorrow. He believed the cycle could not be stopped, but it could be endured. With wisdom, the societies that survive the Great Wave are not the richest or the most powerful. They're the ones that remember who they are when everything else loses value. Part 4. What comes after the wave? We are all part of the historical process, and we must all strive to make it better. Every great wave ends. The prices fall, the debt collapses, and the old order with it. Empires vanish, currencies die, and people emerge blinking into the light of the new world. Fischer never wrote about apocalypse. He wrote about a renewal. The wave destroys, but it also cleanses. It washes away corruption, resets values, and leaves behind a people forced to remember what truly matters. After the medieval collapse came the Renaissance. Art and faith were reborn. Out of the ruins of the Tudor century rose the English Revolution, which planted the seeds of modern liberty and constitutional law. After the hunger and blood of the French Revolution came the birth of democracy and the Industrial Age. Each collapse, however brutal, made room for a new moral and cultural order. Fischer believed that what follows the breaking point depends on how people respond to the chaos. Some clinging to what is dying, others begin to rebuild before the water even settles. He wrote that renewal comes from the margins, the ordinary people who keep the integrity when the institutions fall. When inflation devours trust, those who hold to honesty become the foundation of the next age. When the crowd turns violent, those who live with restraint become the new teachers. When cynicism spreads, those who keep faith and meaning become the start of civilization again. The coming equilibrium, Fischer said, is not automatic, it must be earned. The societies that endure the Great Wave are those that rediscover balance between freedom and order, wealth and virtue, progress and humility. If the modern wave is nearing its crest, then we stand where every generation once stood, at the edge of collapse that could either cleanse or consume. The choice is not whether the tide will turn, but what kind of people will be when it does. We cannot stop the wave, but we can prepare our hearts for it. Build family, seek truth, refuse bitterness, invest in what holds value beyond price, faith, courage, and character. Because when the storm ends, those things are all that will remain. Closing. Two paths before the tide. In the end, we are standing on the edge of another great wave. Every sign points to the same cycle, the unraveling of stability, the return of chaos, and the question of what comes next. We have two paths ahead. The first is reform, like what came after World War II, when the world built a new liberal order that restored a sense of fairness and rebuilt the middle class. That path requires humility, unity, and moral clarity. It requires the ability to recognize truth even when it is uncomfortable. The second path is one humanity has taken too many times before, the path of revolution, destruction, and revenge. The French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and others shows what happens when society tears itself apart rather than rebuilds. Reform demands that we share a common language and a common sense of reality. When we can no longer agree on something as basic as what a woman is, the odds of a peaceful renewal grow dim. The great wave is rising. The only question left is, will we learn from the last one or drown in this one?